Now when you say Spring, it basically means Spring Framework, right? We are talking about a framework here. And Spring is one of the best framework available for Java. Yes, we had different frameworks before. Example, for web development, we were using Sturds. In the enterprise market, we were happy with EJB. And then on the other hand, we have database side where we were happy with JPA. But then now with the help of Spring, you can achieve everything. The one thing which is amazing about Spring is it focuses on POJOs. Now remember, when you talk about EJBs, it was all about entities, right? They were good. You can build huge applications which are stable, scalable using EJB. But then still, the components which we were using is very heavy in terms of the size or the services it uses. But what if I say you can do everything with the help of POJOs? Now, if you don't know what this POJO means, if you don't know what services means, that's completely fine. Just for this course, you will get everything. But then if you know about POJOs, yes, we can use POJOs in Spring. Now, Spring is also the combination of multiple projects. It's not just one project which you'll be using. Example, let's say if you want to achieve a very common feature of Spring, which is dependency injection, we have a separate module for it. If you want to work on web, if you want to make a web application, we have a separate module for it. And of course, one of our favorite, if you want to build a REST application, we have a separate module. What if I say Spring also can be used for security? That's awesome, right? As a developer, we are focusing more on application development. We are not focusing on the security part of it, and Spring will help you there as well. If you want to connect with database with the help of some JPA, Spring has a different module. So Spring is basically a collection of modules it has, right? And then we'll be going through most of this module. So we'll be talking about Spring Code, which will help you for a dependency injection. We'll talk about Spring MVC, which will help you for web development. We'll talk about Spring REST to make REST APIs, and this goes on. So before going for the actual modules, let's talk about one important thing, which is the official website of Spring. Now, if you go to official website, let's go to Google and search for Spring. And the moment you search for Spring, it will give you this official website, which is spring.io. Just click on that. So you can see it says Spring by Pivotal. So Pivotal is basically a company who has designed Spring and you can use it for free. That's great. That's an open source project which you have. Now, if you click on Spring projects, you can see we have a lot of projects here which we have talked about before. We have Spring Boot. Again, that's a surprise for you. What is Spring Boot? Will not reveal that as of now. We have Spring Framework. If you want to work with data flow, we have that as well. If you want to work on Spring Cloud, we have Spring Cloud. We have Spring Data. And then this is very important, Spring Security. And then you can also build Spring Web Services, right, which is your SOAP. And the list goes on. There are so many features which we can use here. Of course, we cannot be covering everything in this course. We'll be focusing on most important part, which is Spring Framework. So of course, our focus is this one. With this, we'll also cover Spring Boot, and Spring Data will be also there. And then one of my favorite, which is Spring Security. Okay, that's the official website. And the amazing thing about Spring is, not just Spring, it's about Java. We have amazing documentation. Same goes for Java docs we have. In fact, instead of referring any book, you can refer Java docs and you can solve your queries. We have huge community. In the same way, we have Spring documents as well. So if you can just go to the guides, do we have here? So you can see you will get a lot of help from this. Otherwise, you can just click on this and search for Spring docs. And you can see it gives you Spring documentation as well. You can click on guides, and this is where you will get the reference documentation. Just click on this. In fact, they will also give you EPUB format. So let's say if you want to read your book in a mobile, so you can also use EPUB. In fact, if you want to get that, you can simply search for Spring Framework EPUB, and this will get to the official website. You can just go here. Okay, they are giving you 4.3. 5.0 is also available. So if you click on the first one, you can see that we have the reference documented, which is EPUB of Spring 5. That's amazing, right? In fact, I'm a big fan of this documentation. At least for Spring, you can refer everything on book, the ebook, which I'm talking about. Otherwise, you can just refer online. You can see we have online documentation. Let's say if you want to know about Spring Cloud, just click on Spring Cloud, and you can see it gives you all the options. You can click on documentation, and you will get it. So you can see I'm clicking on the documentation. You can see we got single HTML. Open that and you can read the entire documentation. So that's how you can refer documentation. Yes, there are some books available as well on Amazon, on different websites, of course. So you can just go there and you can buy any book. I will also try to list my favorite books available for Spring, but then as of now, the Spring documentations is awesome, and with these videos, of course. Now, what are the prerequisites for Spring? The first thing you should know is Java, of course, right? So if you don't know Java, how can you work on Spring framework? In fact, any framework on Java. So the core Java part is very important. You should know what is oops, you should know what is exception handling, what is threads, and all those basic concepts. Of course, loops as well. The next thing you should know is database connectivity. So when you say database, it can be MySQL with Java, you should be maybe Postgres with Java. So whatever database you have worked on with Java, that JDBC connection is very important. So if you know that, that will be amazing. The next two is very important. The first one is servlet and JSP. Now, of course, when you work on Spring MVC, it's a MVC model. Now you'll be thinking, okay, we have done with servlet JSP, why you have to learn old technologies? What if I say in Java framework, we normally work on Tomcat, right? So Tomcat is a servlet container, which simply means even if you are running Spring framework on Tomcat, ultimately everything will be converted into servlets. So having the knowledge of servlet and JSP will be awesome. So not everything, but basics are very important. Example, you should know how to send data from client to server, then what is HTTP request object, HTTP response object, all those basic concepts, that's it. The next thing you should be knowing is ORM framework. Now it can be Hibernate, iBetis, or simple JPA, everything will be fine. So I would suggest, if you have not seen Hibernate videos, it is available on YouTube for free. Just go there and you can watch Hibernate videos. So that's the basic thing you'll be required here. That's it, nothing else. Yes, there are some optional concepts. If you know, that will be amazing. You know how internet works, the protocol works. Then the next thing is, we have for Spring security, we should be knowing about LDAP, OAuth, the basics of it, of course. That will be advantage. But again, once we start with a particular module, in every module I'll be talking about some basics of it, what are things required for you to learn. So you can just pause the videos and you can go back and Google it, right? It's not that difficult. Even if you don't know Core Java, that's fine. You can just pause this video, pause the series, go back to my Core Java videos, watch some of them, which is freely available on this website. Just go there and you can learn basic Core Java and you can come back here. That's completely fine. So that's the prerequisite you should be having, and that's it. That's it, everyone. Now it's time to talk about the requirement in terms of software. Of course, right, if you want to write your Spring code, where you will write it. In fact, we have the simple way, right? You can open Notepad, type your code, and you can run it in command line. We can do that. But hold on, we will be building big projects, right? So of course, if you're learning Spring framework, in future you will be building amazing projects. And that's where, if you have a good IDE with you, it will be an awesome thing, right? And that's where we have a lot of IDEs available. You can use NetBeans, which is everyone's favorite. You can use Eclipse, which is industry-wide famous. You can also use one of the best IDE available for Java, which is IntelliJ, the ultimate version, of course, because in community version, I guess Spring will not be supported. So you have to go for the ultimate version, and it is awesome. The only thing is it's not a free version. But then on the other hand, what if I say Spring officially gives you a separate IDE? It's not compulsory to use that. You can still use NetBeans or Eclipse. So software name is Spring Tool Suite. So if you search for it, you can see it will take you to the official website. Just click on that and you can download this Spring STS for free. Now you'll be thinking, oh, we have to learn a new IDE now. Not exactly. If you have worked on Eclipse before, Spring is Eclipse. So it's an Eclipse IDE. On top of that, we have a Spring layer. In fact, if you just go here, it says based on Eclipse. Can you see that? So yes, ultimately you are using Eclipse. You're not using something else. It's just that you don't have to add a Spring plugin in Eclipse to use it, right? You can simply use STS. So you can download any version which you like. So for this machine, I will download the Windows 64-bit because this is a Windows machine. Now the only thing is, of course, it will take some time for download. So if you want to install this version, you also need to have a JDK available. So JDK is something which is prerequisite. But then which one? So the suggested one is the minimum requirement for this is JDK 8. Because we'll be working on Spring Framework 5, for which JDK 8 is the benchmark. The reason is in Spring 5, we got reactive programming. It supports Spring reactive programming now. And reactive programming can be achieved with the help of Lambda expression, which is only available in Java 8. But then Spring Framework 5 also supports Java 9. So that's great. If you have Java 9 with you, you can also implement Java 9 features in Spring 5. But we'll not be focusing on that. We'll be only focusing on Java 8 features with Spring Framework 5. So once it gets downloaded, you can install it, you can unzip it, and you can use it. But how to do that, we'll see in the next video. Now once you have your STS with you, of course you have to unzip it because that's a zip version. The only tip is when you unzip it, make sure that you unzip with the help of a small name, because if you unzip that with a big name, it may give you the issue which I was facing from a long time. So make sure that you give a small name, remove that version number there. Now once you got the unzipped version, you can see it says HTS bundle. Let's double click on that. Now it will give you this thing which is awesome, because when you work with Eclipse, you have to download Tomcat separately. That's what you do. And of course, Tomcat is not that heavy to download. But then Pivotal says, hey, when you are using HTS, we will give you Tomcat as well. So it will give you Pivotal TC server, which is pre-configured for this. And then we have STS as well. So let's double click on STS and we got STS here. And you can see that beautiful logo of it. Double click on this. It will open just like Eclipse because behind the scene is Eclipse, right? It will take some time for you when you open it for the first time because it will a lot of files. Now it will ask you for the workspace name as we do in Eclipse. So here I will give a name as Spring Course. Again, you can give any name, doesn't matter. It will simply create a folder in your document in which you will be having all your projects. Simply click on launch and it will take some time to launch it since we are doing it for the first time. So fast forward, you can see it is still opening. And so that's, my friend, is STS for you. Yes, it looks like Eclipse. Now I will close this dashboard. Of course, you can see we have reference documentation available here as well. Simply click this and you can see this is, so if you are new to any IDE, if you have not worked on NetBeans, Eclipse before, on the left hand side you can see we have a project section because this is where you will be having all your projects. In the center you have an area where you will write a code, and in the below section you can see we have console here. So all your logs will be printed there. If you want to print something on a console, that's where you will get the output. Now let me create my first project. Now if you can see, we can create multiple type of projects here. We can create a Spring startup project, which we are not going to see now. That's a surprise. We'll see how we can make Spring easy. The second thing is we have Spring Legacy project. We'll not do that now. We can create a Java project, but there is one issue with this. The issue is when you work with Spring framework, we need to add a Spring dependencies, right? And when you say you want to add Spring dependencies, you have to go to Google, you have to search for all the dependencies which you need, and then you have to download it manually. But what if I say you can do that with the help of Maven, because Maven will help you here. So Maven is basically a build tool which will help you to get dependencies, which will help you to create a package for your project, which will help you to compile your codes as well. But at this point, let me use Maven only for downloading the dependencies. Let me click on Maven project. Okay, so you can see it will say you want to create a project. Yes, I want to create a new project. Now Maven has multiple types. I want you to also know about Maven. As I mentioned, you can just go to YouTube or Google. You can search how Maven works. But just to give you a brief, using Maven, you can create multiple type of projects. You can create a simple standalone project. You can create a web project. Let me create a quick start project, which will have nothing, a simple project. Click on next. Now you can give a special name to it. Now we have to also mention group ID. Time being, I will mention com.telusko as my group ID. The artifact ID will say this is demo project, and then click on finish. Now once you click on finish, it will download the Maven dependency. It will create a project for you with the all required dependencies. But what if you want some extra dependency? Because if you see, this project will have nothing. It will not have Spring dependencies. It will not have Hibernate. Of course, we have not mentioned that as of now. So how do you add dependencies? What if you need a jar file for Spring? It's actually very easy. You can just open your pom.xml. Now Maven works with this file in which you have to mention the dependencies. You can see this is where you have to mention what dependency you need. Now if you think Maven is the only option, not exactly. We can also achieve this with the help of Gradle. So you can use Gradle or you can use Maven, that's your choice. I guess a lot of people nowadays, they are moving towards Gradle, but again, Maven also works. Now question arises from where you will get this dependency. So you have to type it by yourself. You have to just go here. Now the thing is, it is downloading some artifacts for us from the internet. As of now, let's keep it on hold. This is where you have to put your dependency tags. But we don't know what tag we have to type, right? We don't know the artifact name for the Spring framework. In that case, let's go to the official website again. Now for this, we will go to Google and search for MVN. So we'll search for MVN repository. Now this is where you can download all the Maven dependencies. So let's click on this website, and this is where you will get for Spring. So just go here and search for Spring, and you have to download Spring Context. Okay, so not Spring Context, because Spring Context will also have Spring code. Let's click on this. Now you can go with any version. My preferred version is always where you have maximum usage. So you can see we have a usage of 419, which looks stable. So let's go for 5.1.3. Let's copy this. In fact, when you click on that, it will automatically copy it. So just go back to your application and paste. You just have to specify that. And if you go to Maven dependencies now on the left hand side, you can see by default we have JUnit. But hold on, where is Spring? If you can see, it says building workspace. So if you click on that, it is downloading all the dependencies. Yes, it takes some time depending upon internet speed. Unfortunately, my internet speed is not that good today. so it takes some time. And you can see we got dependencies which we wanted, right? So if you don't have to download this jar file one by one, it will get downloaded automatically the moment you paste that code. So this is working, you got your dependencies, and now you can write your first application. Welcome back everyone, my name is Arvind Reddy, and in this video we are going to talk about Spring Code. Now Spring Code is the first module which we discussed from Spring Framework. Now it's quite famous because it solved one of the biggest issue in the software world, which is dependencies. Now I'm not talking about libraries, okay, I'm talking about the objects. Think about this, the Java world, everything is object, right? In fact, we call Java as object-oriented programming, which means if you want to achieve anything in Java, you have to get object. And that's great, right? But there's only one issue with this. The issue is, when you work with objects, we don't just create one object, right? You create multiple objects. Example, let's say if you want to build a laptop. So let's imagine we have a laptop class in which you want to specify some properties. Now if you want to use laptop will have certain properties, right? The first one, laptop will have a size of a laptop will have a weight of the laptop, right? Every laptop varies in the weight. Laptop will also have a color, so we can have all those properties. But to make a laptop work, we need a special object inside it. Example, if you want to build a laptop needs a hard drive, a laptop needs a RAM, a laptop needs a CPU, right? So we need all those stuff, right? Apart from this, we also need keyboard and monitor, but imagine we need all those things. Now you have two choices. You can build all those objects by yourself. Now you will say we can do that, right? What we can do is, of course, you'll be having a class for CPU, you'll be having a class for RAM, you'll be having a class for hard drive. So what you will simply do, you will create those objects, right? So you will simply say CPU obj equal to new CPU, you will say hard drive, whatever class name you have, HDD obj equal to new HDD. But we have an issue here. The issue is, you are creating the object, right? That means you are responsible to destroy it. That's an issue, okay? When you create the object, you are responsible to destroy that. So the second issue we have is, what if you have two classes? You don't have one CPU class, you have two CPU classes. One is Intel class, one is AMD class, and now if you want to design your own laptop, you have two choices, which one you will prefer. And maybe you want to prefer that at runtime. You don't want to do that compile time. You want to say, hey, I want a CPU, but I'm not sure what object I'll be creating. Maybe it will be Intel CPU or a AMD CPU, because both these classes extends a CPU class. And that's where problem starts, that's where you want these dependencies. When I say dependency, I'm not talking about libraries, I'm talking about the objects, because your laptop will not work without these objects. So these dependencies, I want it to be injected in the application, right? So when I want to build a laptop, this dependencies should be coming from outside the world. So maybe I will hire a consultant and say, hey consultant, I want hard drives, I want RAMs, I want CPUs for my machine building. And that's where you don't have to make those devices. You don't have to make your own CPU. You don't have to make your own RAM. And that's what dependency injection will give you. Now, dependency injection has one more name to it, which is IoC. In fact, we can interchange them. We have IoC, which is inversion of control, or normally we refer that in Spring Framework as dependency injection. So further topics will be only focusing on dependency injection. We'll not talk about IoC. But again, if someone says, hey, what is IoC in Spring Framework, you can still talk about dependency injection. It will work. In fact, dependency injection is very famous. You can do that by yourself as well. You can write the entire application. You can use some design patterns to achieve that. But then you have to do that everything by yourself. You have to make sure that your class is singleton. If you have that intention, you have to get your factory classes. But what if I say in Spring Framework, you don't have to worry about all those things, because we have a model which is Spring Code, in which you simply have to mention what dependency you need. Spring Framework will give it to you. I know that looks like a magic, but then it's possible. But I'm not saying everything is magic, okay? Not everything will be happening automatically. You have to do the configuration. I know that's a tricky part, but then again, we have something in future where you don't have to do everything by yourself. You can reduce that configuration. But as of now, if you want to achieve that, if you want to achieve Spring Code dependency injection, we have to do some configuration. Now, example, let's say we'll go for laptop itself. So let's say if you want to build a laptop, you need a hard drive, right? So you don't have to create an object of hard drive. It will be done, it will be injected in your application. But how do you do that? That we'll see in the next video. Welcome back everyone. Till this point we have seen what is Spring Framework, and then we have also done this setup for STS. Now of course, right, Spring is one of the best framework available for Java. There are some other frameworks as well. Example, we have Struts for web development, we have Hibernate for database, and yes, we can use all those frameworks, right? Now, frameworks are awesome, but there's only one issue when you talk about frameworks, and that is we have to do a lot of configuration to achieve the thing which we want. In fact, even if you are building a small application, we need to do a lot of configuration. But think about this. If you have, so let's say in this world, we have so many people building different projects, but all these projects will have something in common. So all the configuration will have some configuration which is common for all the projects. Don't you think the basic configuration should be given by Spring Framework itself? From a long time, when Spring was introduced, everyone loved it, but then there was still the problem with the configuration. But now we have a concept of Spring Boot. Now, using Spring Boot basically means, Spring Boot believes that you should focus on convention instead of focusing on configuration. So it normally states convention over configuration. So you have to focus on your logic, don't focus on the configuration. Okay, when I say don't focus on configuration, I'm talking about the basic configuration. What if you want to have something customized? That's where you have to do some changes, right? But for basic, Spring will give you, or Spring Boot will give you all the basic configuration. Okay, now to understand that, let me create a simple project on Spring Boot. But then don't worry, we'll be also focusing on Spring Framework. So this video will talk about Spring Boot, how do we create a project and how do we use some features there. But then the further videos will focus only on Spring Framework. Now here, first of all, let's create a project. Now first of all, you need STS here, which we have already done. And then we had this project as well, which is demo project in the last video. But now let's do something different. Let's say new, and let's create a Spring Starter project. As of now, it's not important to understand what is this service URL stuff. The only thing which is important here is the project name. I will say this is my first project. Of course, you can give any name. And then I will give a group ID, which is my company name itself. I will say com.telusko. And then here, the package name I want is telusko.first. That's my project name and then package name. Let me click on next, and here you can see it will give you so many options, right? Now this is different, okay? The project which we are building now is a Spring Boot project. So when you say Spring Starter project, it means Spring Boot. It will give you so many features, right? Based on whatever project you are building. Let's say if you are building a web project, you will be selecting web here. If you want to build a project with database, of course, you have to search for JDBC. In fact, if you search for JDBC, you can see if you have an option here. What if you want to work with MySQL? You can choose that. You can choose Postgres. There are so many options here. What if you want to implement security? And that's why we have security features as well. But as of now, we don't need anything. And there's one more thing important, which is Spring Boot version. Now, of course, in new versions, we get new features. As of now, 2.1.2 is stable. So let's go with that. Click on next. Nothing much specific here. Click on finish. Now you can see we got a project here. Okay, is it so fast? Not actually. When you're doing this for the first time, it will download all the project structure and the dependencies from the internet, right? So it will take some time. But on this machine, I've already did this. So I have a local copy of the jar files. And if you can see, if I open this, we already have a Java file here, which is first project application.java. And the amazing thing is it already had some code in it because, okay, at this point, we don't understand what that code is, but let's keep it there. You can see if I open this Maven dependencies, we have so many dependencies here by default. And that's the magic, right? Spring Boot will give you everything which you need, all the basic stuff. Of course, if you want to have some extra features, we have to add those dependencies. But as of now, it will give you everything which is required. Okay, and then the next important file here is the spom.xml. So if you have worked on Maven projects before, you know what a spom file is, right? So this is where you will add required dependencies. I'm talking about the jar files. In this case, we wanted to work with Spring Boot. So you can see we have added two dependencies, one for Spring Boot and for testing purpose as well. Nothing much here. Let's create our first stuff. Now, what exactly I want to create, that we'll see in the next video. In the last video, we have seen how to create a simple Spring Boot application. But now let's understand how exactly we can use it. So let's say we have this main file here in which we have nothing, but then here I want to create the object. Now if you remember, if you go back to the theory video which we have talked about, which is dependencies or dependency injection, normally what happens, when you work on complex projects, that's where you need to add some extra objects. So your application will need some extra objects. Maybe those objects need extra objects. Example, let's say if you build a laptop, you need a hard drive. And to build a hard drive, you need some other parts as well. So you don't have to build. So as a laptop manufacturer, you don't have to build hard drive. You can inject it, or someone else will inject the hard drive in your laptop. You just have to ask for it. And even you don't even have to mention what company hard drive you need. You can simply say, hey, I want an hard drive. Now, based on your consultant or based on your team, they will say, okay, let's use Seagate hard drive. Let's use maybe Hitachi hard drive. That's their choice. So here, what I want is, I can create the object of alien. So I will say alien obj. But hold on, I'm not creating the object, I'm just creating the reference first. To create the reference of alien, we need a alien class, right? Unfortunately, we don't have this class. Okay, let's create one. Okay, when I say alien, I'm only talking about, so normally I refer alien, so all the programmers for me are aliens. In fact, not just programmers, the tech professionals are aliens, because we don't think in real world, right? We think in virtual world. So let's create the class. I will simply click here, and you can see I'm creating a class. The class name is alien, and a very simple class. Now in this class, I want to have a simple method. Okay, like the method name would be, let's say, public void code, because normally as a programmer we write code. So we got code, and in this I'm printing, I'm coding. That's it. Nothing much. We got an alien class in which you have a method which is code, and then we are saying I'm coding. Let's go back to our application here. Now I want to call that method which is code. Of course, right, you can simply say obj.code, but unfortunately this will not work. You know why it will not work? Because we have not initialized this object here, and that's what it's saying. You can see it says the local variable obj may not have been initialized. Now of course, right, this obj local variable inside the main method, how can we initialize it? The best way we can do that is by saying new alien. But that's where the problem starts. You are saying new, which means you as a programmer, you are creating the object. And that's where the problem starts, because when you create the object, you are responsible to maintain it. We don't want to do that, right? We are using Spring Framework. Come on, we can inject the object. But who will create the object for us? And that's where Spring says, hey, if you want object, I will give you the object. You just have to ask for it. How will you ask for it? It's very simple. You can just go here and say, hey Spring, give me a bean. Spring will say, okay, I will give you a bean, but tell me which class object you need. Do you need object of alien class? Do you need object of object class? Do you need object of array class? There are so many classes available, right? Which object do you need? And that's why you will say, okay, you're getting confused. That means I have to mention. So I will simply say alien.class. So you're saying, hey Spring, give me the object of alien class. Okay, Spring will say, okay, but then there's one issue, right? In Java, if you want to call a method, we have to use the object. Of course, right? You can't call the method without the object. So here what I will do is, I will simply say, which class object do you need? So this getBean belongs to an interface which is application context. So let me repeat, getBean method belongs to an interface named as application context. So if you want to call getBean, we need object of application context. The amazing thing is, if you click on this run method, so you can see we have a line here which is spring application.run, which takes the class name itself. If you click on this run, you can see we got documentation, of course. So how do you get the documentation? You just have to press Control and click on the method name which you want. So you can see this run method returns an object of configurable application context. This class or this interface, is it interface? Yes, this interface extends application context. So that means this run is actually giving you the object of application context. So we can simply say application context. Let me import the package. I will say context equal to, we got the object. Now once you got the context object, I can simply come here and you can say context.getBean. Our job is done. Will this work? Let's try. Let's go back here and say right click, run as Springboot app. I hope this will work. Let's try. You normally learn by errors, right? So let's see. And we got error. The error, it says no qualifying bean of type com.telusko.first.alien. But we have a class there, right? It's just that, see, who is responsible to create the object? Spring Framework, right? So Spring responsibility to create the object of alien. And you can mention that to Spring by saying add component. So when you say add component on top of your class, it simply means Spring Framework will know, okay, now it says add component, which means I'm responsible to create the object of alien. Now it should work. Let's go back and let's relaunch the application. And it worked. Can you see that we got the output as I am coding? It's that simple, right? And that's the beauty about Spring Framework. You are not responsible to create the object. So once we have done with alien, Think about this. When you say an alien can code, so I'm talking about programmers here. So when you can code, of course you need a laptop, right? Or a desktop. So if you want to code something, of course we go in multiple steps. We have to compile our code. And that's where you need object of laptop. So let's create one. So we'll say laptop or laptop lab here. I just want to create object of laptop if you want to make it work. And here instead of saying I'm coding, I can simply say lap.compile. Of course, right, when you code, you have to compile your code as well. So I will say compile. Now, what is wrong with this code? There are multiple things which we are doing wrong. First of all, we don't have this class named as laptop. And second of all, okay, we don't have a class. Of course, we don't have a method as well. So let's create this class. Of course, you can right click here. You can create a laptop class. Let me just use a shortcut for IDEs. Let's click here and say, hey, create a laptop class for me. And you can see it will create a laptop class for you. That's a very simple class. Go back to alien. You can see we also have an issue with the compile. So I will click here and I will say create a compile method and job is done. In this compile, I will print. Of course, you can write any statement here. Let's say compiling. So for us, it's not important what is happening inside this method. What is important is how will this alien can get the object of laptop. So of course, right, if you want to make it work, you have to instantiate laptop. As you can see, we are not doing it. And the moment you run this application now, we are saying code. Of course, code will call this method and then it will call compile. But to call compile, first we have to instantiate laptop. Let me just run this application as it is. I will say run as Springboot app. And now you can see we got, okay, it's asking for permission again. And you can see we got an exception, which is null pointer exception in this case. Of course, right, this object here is not instantiated. So of course you can use new laptop here, but then that's the idea, right? We don't want to create the object by ourselves. We are not done for the alien as well. And that's where we can use a special annotation here, which is named as Autowire. So when we use Autowire, it simply means that this object, this laptop object will be created by Spring. Oh, hold on. We're still missing something. We have to mention that component here as well, right? You have to say add component. So you have to make sure all the classes has add component on top of it. The same thing we have done for alien. Now what will happen is the moment of this application, of course, we have a detailed explanation for this in the next module. This is just the introduction for Spring Boot, how it can be awesome. So you can see the moment you load this application, it will give you two objects, the object of alien, the object of laptop. Right? And in the alien class, we are asking for the laptop object. So it will check, hey, do we have object of laptop available in the memory? And the answer is yes. So it will give you the laptop object here. And that's the beauty. Now, since you are not creating the object, it will be managed by Spring Framework. And trust me, it will give you a lot of advantage in making big projects. As of now, yes, it doesn't make sense because we have a very small code. But hold on, now the more we learn about Spring Framework with different modules, different projects, this will surely make sense. So that's about Autowire, okay? So you can see, oh, we have not run this code, let's do that. So we'll say right click, run as Spring Boot app, and you can see we got the output, it says compiling. That means we are able to call this code method and code is able to call this compile without any issue. Let me repeat, we are not creating the object of laptop. It is managed by Spring Framework. So that's it from this video. In the next module, we'll talk about the fancy stuff. I mean, when I say fancy, it simply means what is happening behind the scene. Welcome back, everyone. Till this point, we have seen some amazing stuff in Spring Boot, right? We have seen how to create a project in Spring Boot. We have seen how to use dependency injection there. And then the important concept, Autowire. But then still, we have not understood how Spring is doing everything behind the scene. And that's what we have to understand now. Question arises, how will you understand what is happening behind the scene? Because in Spring Boot, you cannot do anything else, right? Because everything is done by Spring Boot. And that's why next few videos will not be based on Spring Boot. It will be based on simple Spring Framework. Now, when you say simple Spring Framework, that's where you are responsible to specify everything. What is the scope of your bin? Is it singleton or prototype? Again, we'll talk about that in detail, don't worry. But we have so many things which is happening behind the scene. That's what we are going to see now. So let's get started. So step one, we will be creating a project in Spring. Okay, not a Spring Boot project, a simple Spring project. But then question arises, how will you manage dependencies? I'm not talking about object dependencies, I'm talking about jar files. And that's where we can use Maven, right? So let's create a project here. I will create a Maven project and we'll name this project as, okay, let's say next. I'm not making a web application, I'm simply making core application or what you say, a standalone software. So we'll select quick start here, click on next. This is where you have to mention a group ID. So let's say com.telusko and the artifact ID will be Spring demo. Of course, you can go for any name, doesn't matter, right? And click on finish. Now, once you got your project, now this is not a Spring project, okay? The name is only Spring, but then it's a normal Maven project. What we want is we want to have Spring features here, but why? So to understand that, let's go back to app, and this is where I want to create an object. Okay, first of all, which object? If you remember in the Springboot videos, we have talked about the class as alien. Let's stick to that here. So let me remove this hello world. Oh, first of all, let me just verify if everything is working. That's what we do, right? When you create a new project, we just have to verify if the thing which you are working with is working. So let's try. So let's right click here and say run as Java application. You should see some output in the console and it says hello world. That great. At least this is working. So what next? Let's create an object of alien. The way you do that is by going here and say, hey, I want to say alien object. So I will say alien obj. But unfortunately, we don't have this class, right? That's what it's saying here. We don't have that class as alien. So let's create one. So of course, you can just go there and you can create a separate class as alien. Otherwise, you can simply use shortcuts here. So let's click here and say, hey, create a class for me. And now we'll be getting an alien class. Click on finish and you can see we got a very simple alien class. Now this is where I want a very simple method, which is, let's say, public void show, or maybe public void code, the same method which we have used earlier. And here we'll print I'm coding. Nothing fancy. We got a simple alien and then we got a method which is code and we are printing I'm coding. Okay, so the idea is I want to instantiate this alien first. So I will simply say equal to new alien. Oh, hold on, that's what we don't want to do, right? We don't want to instantiate this object by ourselves. That's where Spring comes into picture. So what Spring will do now? Now Spring provides you an amazing feature of dependency injection, or you can call it as IoC, which is inversion of control, where you don't have to create the object. It will be done by Spring Framework. Okay, so let's ask Spring Framework here. So we'll say, hey Spring, give me the object of alien. Okay, we have used that method name, right? Now if you remember, we have a very special method here which is getBean. Now getBean is responsible to give you the object, but we have a twist here. The twist is getBean belongs to some interface, right? That's the first thing. Second, so when you say it belongs to some interface, it should belong to some libraries, right? Of course, in core Java or the JDK which we normally use here, we don't have this as an inbuilt class or an inbuilt method, right? Inside JVM or inside JRE. So we have to get it from somewhere, and that's where we have to add dependencies for Spring Framework. If you go to your Maven dependencies, you can see we don't have any Spring dependency here. So that should be our first step. We have to add dependency. And to achieve that, let's go to browser. So we will go to Maven repository. This is where you will get all dependencies, right? And here we will be searching for Spring context. Now when you search for Spring context, you can see we got it here. Let's click on that. Now you can see we have so many versions. The latest version is 5.1.4. Now depending upon when you watch this video, if you're watching this in Jan, Feb, of course you will be working on 5.1.4. If you're watching this later, of course you will be having some new versions. But every minor version there will not be any big updates. So we can select any of this. In fact, I prefer the dependencies which have more usage. You can see we have 504 here. So let's pick up 5.1.3. Okay, let's copy this code from here, go back, and where to paste it. And if you are working on Maven before, we have to just go to pom.xml file, and this is where we have to add a dependency. So simply paste it, and the moment you say save, now if you are doing this for the first time, it will take some time because all these dependencies will be coming from the Maven repository, the remote one. Luckily on this laptop I have already used it, so we have a local copy of it, and that's why it took around 1 second to do that. Okay, so once we got dependency, let's use them. Where to use it? Go back to your app, and this is where you will be using an interface in which you have this method which is getBean. Okay, now what's the interface name? Okay, you guessed it right. We have a concept of application context. But then before the application context came into picture, we had something else. Think about this. If you want to make a car, you have to open a car factory. If you want to make a mobile phone, you have to make a mobile phone factory. If you want to make a bean, you need you guessed it right, it's BeanFactory. So we have an interface named as BeanFactory. Let's simply say control space here. And you can see this BeanFactory interface belongs to Spring Framework library. So let's click that. Let's instantiate it. We'll simply say factory equal to. So we'll say BeanFactory factory equal to. Oh, we have a problem here. BeanFactory is an interface. We don't have a class. So let's instantiate it with the help of a class. And the class name or the class which implements BeanFactory is XML BeanFactory. That's it. You just have to mention that. So you have to mention BeanFactory factory equal to new XML BeanFactory. And you can see we got a strike there. Now this strike simply means that we should not be using this class here because this is deprecated. Of course, we have some new features, we got some new classes. So you should not be using this. But time being, since we are into learning state, we'll be learning everything from start, right? So this is the first class which came into picture to implement BeanFactory. Time being, just ignore that deprecated strike there. Okay, now we have an issue. The issue is when you say get bean, so let's say if I say factory here, I will simply say factory dot get bean. We still have an issue here. The issue is how do you know which class object do you need? So that's what you have to specify in this bracket. I will simply say, hey, I want object of alien. But see, Spring Framework is a framework, right? It's not a Superman, it's not a magician to know everything, right? So when you say alien, Spring should know what this alien means. And that's where we have to do some configuration. Of course, right? Whenever you work with frameworks, there is a part of configuration. That's one of the reasons why people love Spring Boot, right? We have less configuration there. But since we are not using Spring Boot, we are using normal Spring Framework, we have to configure it. But how? There are different ways you can configure this. There is a XML-based configuration, we have a Java-based configuration, or we can also use annotations. Time being, since we are into learning state, let's use XML. That means if you want to customize it, if you want to specify configuration, we have to create XML files. And then you have to specify that file here. But then unfortunately, we cannot simply pass a file name here. If you want to specify the file, we have to create one more object here, which is new file system resource. Is it there? File system resource, yes. And in this, you have to mention the file name. So file name is, we'll be creating that file. I will simply name it as spring.xml. Of course, you can go with any name, but let's go with this. Okay, once we got this factory object, once we have specified, hey, I want an alien, but still we are getting error. See, it's not because of we don't have that file. It's just that when you say get bean, it will give you object, right? Example, if you see, it says it will give you object, we want object of alien. In that case, in this bracket, I will simply specify alien. That's it. You can see there's no error. Yes, we have some warning, but that's fine. Let's right click here. At least let's see. See, of course, this will not work because we don't have spring.xml file as of now. Let's see the error as well. So I will simply say run as Java application. Yes, I'm expecting error here, and we got an error. And that's why it is saying file not found exception, which is it's not able to find spring.xml. Okay, let's create it then. So let's right click on your project and I will say new. And this is where you'll be saying, hey, I want to create a XML file. That's one way of doing it. Otherwise, you can simply say, see, the problem is when you say XML, we have to add the DDD as well. If you don't want to do that, you can simply say new. There's an option of Spring Bean configuration file, and that's why we are using STS here. You could have done the same thing in Eclipse as well, but in Eclipse, you don't get this option, which is Spring Bean configuration file. Let's click here, and let's mention the file name. The file name here would be spring.xml, the same name which you have mentioned in the code. Let's click on enter, and we got our XML file. This is what we wanted, right? And you can see everything is mentioned. Let's say enter here. This is where you have to say, hey, see, if you go back to your app, it says get bean of alien. So we just have to mention, hey, Spring Framework, whenever a user says alien, give the object of alien class. Now, alien class belongs to a package which is com.telusko.springdemo.alien. Whenever in a code says alien, you have to create object of alien. This alien, the class alien. But we cannot simply use this syntax, right? We have to use syntax of Spring. And that's where Spring says, hey, if you want to specify this, create a bean, or let's say bean, every bean will have an ID. So we'll say ID equal to, and ID is alien. So whatever ID you want, whatever name you want to use in the code, which is alien in this case, mention that, and also mention the class of which you want an object. I will simply say I want object of com. In fact, we can use alien because it will give you the class as it is. Say control space, you can say it will auto-complete it. And that's it. That's the only thing you have to mention. It's beauty, right? You just have to configure it by saying, hey, when a user says alien, give the object of alien. Go back to your code. And now let's run this application. So right click, say run as Java application, and oh, no error, but we have not also got the output. The reason is we are not calling code. So we'll be saying obj.code, because as an alien, as a programmer, you have to code, right? So let's run this application now. I hope it will work, and it worked. Can you see that we got I am coding? And that's it. It's so simple. So what we have done, we are trying to use Spring Framework to get the object. As you can see, the object of alien is not created by you, it's created by Spring Framework. I know for this example it doesn't make sense because to create one object we are doing so much of stuff, right? But think about the complex of application. What if you are building an application where you have maybe 15-20 classes and every class will have, let's say, 2-3 objects? You don't have to manage those objects, right? It will be managed by Spring Framework. But how do we do that? That we'll see in the upcoming videos. So till this point we have seen how to create a simple Spring project where you can introduce a concept of BeanFactory which will give you the object, right? It works, but still we have an issue here. The issue is, you can see the code we are getting, it says deprecated, right? So this class XML BeanFactory is deprecated. We should not be using that. Of course, you can search for some other class which implements BeanFactory and which will make it work without deprecated, of course. There's one more thing which is important here. When Spring came into picture in 2003, it was basically for dependency injection, right? That was the main intention. But later on, they added some new features, right? Every time you go to Spring website, you will see some new projects. And of course, for new features, you need some new methods. And those methods are not available in BeanFactory. So instead of using BeanFactory, we can use amazing thing, which is we have a concept of application context. In fact, if we have seen that in Spring Boot, right? We have this interface which is application context. We'll simply say factory. Again, you can use different name. But then question arises, how to instantiate this? Because application context is an interface, right? So we have a class which named as class path XML. Let's say control space. So we have a class which says class path XML application context. Let's use that. Now this class implements application context. Example, if I click here, you can see it's a class which extends abstract XML application context. If I click on that, it says extends abstract refreshable config application context. If I click on that, somewhere if you go up and up and up, you will find everything extends from application context. Are we getting there today? Yes, we got it. So you can see we have the whole hierarchy there. And unfortunately, by doing that, I have opened so many classes here. Let me just close them quickly. Okay, let's get back here. So instead of using BeanFactory, now we are using application context. The amazing thing is, here itself you can mention spring.xml. You don't have to mention new file system resource or something like that. You can simply mention the thing. And you can see we are not getting any deprecated now because we will be using application context a lot. So now let's right click and say run as Java application. We have not changed much. We have only changed from BeanFactory to application context. Let's click on run and we got an error. It says file not found exception. That's weird. We have that file here, right? The problem is, since you have mentioned class path, right, it will look for this file in class path. So you have to move this file in a class path in a Java folder, of course. Let's keep it there now and let's relaunch the application. And now it worked. We got I'm coding. That's great. So that's how we use application context in your Spring project. In the last video, we have seen how do we use application context. But still, we don't know how everything is working behind the scene. That's important, right? So let's understand what happens when you say application context and then when you say alien get bean. To understand that, what I will do is I will go back to my alien and let's create a constructor here. So let's say a constructor. So you can see we have a constructor here. A simple constructor which simply says alien object created. Nothing fancy, we got a simple constructor there. What I want to understand is, if I run this application, of course it will call the constructor first. It will say alien object created and it says I'm coding. That's great. That means Spring Framework will create the object, and of course when you create the object, constructor will be called. But my question is, what happens when you comment this? Because now when I'm commenting this line, that means I'm not asking for alien object. So the question is, will Spring Framework create that object for me, even if I'm not using it? Let's run this. The moment you run this code, you can see we are not getting I'm coding because we are not calling code, but still your Spring Framework is creating the alien object for you. It's because Spring believes Even if you don't want the object, it is my job to create the object. But how Spring knows that we will be needing alien object later? It's because when you run this application, the first line of execution is main method, right? So it will come to main, it will check, hey, the next line is we have to create object of application context. Now, application context will simply create a Spring container for you. Now, this is a Spring container. All the objects or all the processing which you do in Java happens on JVM. So inside your JVM, we'll be having a special container which we will call as Spring container, which will have Spring beans. Oh, what is bean now? Any class which has certain variables and every variable will have getters and setters is normally referred as bean. Now in this class we don't have any variables, and that's why we don't have any methods. But then this is also a bean. You can imagine any class as a bean as of now. So we want Spring to create the object of all these classes. But how Spring will know that? Because you can see we have specified a file name here, which is spring.xml. So your Spring container will check this file and it will say, okay, so it's my responsibility. Okay, so I'm Spring container here. It's my responsibility to create the object of alien, because as a developer you have mentioned that here. What if you mention some more objects? If you create object of object class, if you create object of some other classes, if you write 5 beans here or 5 bean tag, it will create 5 objects for you. That's what Spring is doing, even if you don't need the object. So if I create object of some weird class which I don't even know in JRE, it will create the object for you. Okay, you just have to mention that there. So the moment you run this line, it will create the object for you in the Spring container. It is your responsibility now, or it is your decision now to use that object or not. In this case, I'm not using it, but still we got the object. So that's what is happening behind the scene. The moment you say get bean alien, it will go to Spring container and say, hey Spring container, I want the object whose ID is alien. And Spring container will say, okay, we have the object here, just take it. And that's the object you're getting, and that's why it is working. But then with this, we have some more questions, okay? Example, let's say, what if you have certain variables here? Example, let's say, let me create a simple variable here, or maybe I will not be using a private variable, I will be using a simple variable, int. I will be naming this variable as age. Of course, you can go with anything. Every alien will have a different age, right? Okay, it can be same, but normally it is different. So let's say if I have an age there, and I want to print the age of a particular alien. So I will say obj.age. So when you print age, what do you think? What value you will get? So of course you can specify the age. By default you can specify the age here. You can say by default the age is 18, whatever age you want to specify, maybe 12. Otherwise, for every object, for this obj, time it I will say this is obj1, just to check what is happening. So I will say obj1, and then I'm printing the age, and you can see I have not mentioned the age, and by default the age will be 0. So let's run this code, and you can see the age is by default 0. That's great. So before printing age, I want to specify the age as, let's say, 15. That's the age which I'm mentioning here. Let's run this code, and you can see we got 15. That's great. But what if I create one more object, or maybe if I want to create one more reference? Let me just copy paste the code as it is. Let's paste it here, and this time I will say this is obj2, not 1. Let's go back here. I want to call code by obj2. I want to specify the age. I don't want to specify the age for 2. Let's keep it blank, and now let's say this is obj2.age. Now what do you think will be the age of obj1? Of course 15, right? We have specified that. But what will be the age of obj2? That's the question. Let's run this application, and you can see both the object has the same age. So either we got 2 objects with the same age, or we got only 1 object and both the reference are pointing to the same object. That's what is happening here. Go back to the previous example. When you say line number 18, when you say, hey Spring Framework, I want an object whose ID is alien, Spring will say, okay, we have the object, take it. When you go for the second time as well on line number 24, you're saying, hey Spring container, I want the object with ID alien. Spring will say, we have the object, just take it. It will not create a new object for you. That means both the reference, which is obj1 and obj2, are referring to the same object. And that's why we normally call all the Spring beans as singleton beans, because the object will be created only once. That's awesome, right? But what if you want different object? What if you don't want to follow singleton pattern? What if you want to have a different object every time you call for the object? And that's what we'll see in the next video. In the last video, we have created this alien object and then we were trying to create two objects, but unfortunately, we got only one object. Now, is it a feature? And the answer is yes. By default, Spring follows a singleton design pattern, which simply means by default, Spring container will give you one object. But what if you want multiple objects? And that's where Spring gives you a choice, and that is the scope. Let's try. So let's go back here in spring.xml, and if you see this bean tag, there is one more attribute here which is missing. The moment you say control space, you can see we have an attribute known as scope. By default, the scope is singleton, which simply means that Spring container will give you only one instance of this class. Even if you ask for 10 times, it will give you only one instance. Example, if I go back to app and let me create obj3, obj4, still you will get one object because by default it is singleton. What if you want multiple objects? And that's where we have to use a different scope. So apart from singleton, we have one more scope to use, and that is prototype. Now what it means? Prototype simply means that whenever you ask for a bean, Spring container will give you, or it will create an object at that point. Example, when you say get bean once with alien, Spring container will give you one object. Again, when you say get bean with alien, Spring container will give you second object. So if you ask for 10 times, Spring will give you 10 different instances of that particular class. Let me prove my point. So you can see I have made it singleton now. I've made it prototype now. So if I go back to app, let's run this application once. So I will say right click and say run as Java application and look at the output now. So you got 15 for the first object and you got 0 for the second object because we have two different objects. It's that simple, right? So singleton is you will get only one object. Prototype you will get multiple objects based on the number of time you are requesting for it. But what if you are not requesting even once? You can see I'm creating the object of application context, which is your Spring container, but I'm not asking for any object. Do you think it will create object for you? Let's try. The moment you run this code, you can see it's not saying object created even once. That means in singleton, even if you don't ask for the object, Spring container will give you that object. But in case of prototype, you have to ask for it, otherwise it will not create the object. Right? Now, which one to use is depend upon your situation, right? So if you think there's an object, you need only one object, of course you will go for singleton. Apart from that, if you think, we will be using multiple objects, so you have to go for prototype. So that's the scope in Spring. So we have singleton, we have prototype. We have some other scope as well, but that's not applicable in Spring code. That's for some other modules. So in the last video, we have seen the scope in Spring, right? We have singleton and we have prototype. Now let's go back to our alien and you can see we have one variable here which is age. Now logically, this age variable should be private variable, right? That's what we do. We have to make sure that all your variables are private. In order to access these variables, what we need is getters and setters, right? And we don't have it here. Let's go back and let's create getters and setters for this. So I will right click here, say source, generate getters and setters, select this, click on generate, and you can see we got getters and setters. If I go back to my app now, and you can see I don't want to assign the values now. Of course, you cannot do it. You cannot even use the age variable directly. You have to use set age and get age. But time being, I will not do anything. And let me also remove this second object. We don't need that. In fact, one more change. I don't want to use prototype, I want to use singleton, and the amazing thing is when you don't mention any type, it is by default singleton. Let's go back to app. We don't even need this age. The thing is, oh, we need age, but then it should print using get age, right? So I will say obj1.getAge. The thing is, I want to assign a default age because if you don't define the default age, by default it will be 0. I don't want 0. At least the age should be 12 or maybe 10. How do I mention that 10 here? Of course, there is one way. You can just go here and say 10, right? By default, the age value will be 10. That's one option. Otherwise, you can just go to app. When you create the object, you can assign it manually. You can pass it to the constructor. What if you want to assign the value in the Spring Bean itself? Because remember, the object will be created by Spring Framework. So the constructor will be called by Spring Framework, right? So I want to assign the value for age here in this XML file. Can we do that? Let's try. So let me just expand this bin. Now in this bean tag, we can have one more tag here which is named as property. Now what is property? So every variable in your class, if your class is Bean, every variable will be known as property. You can have multiple properties. So that's the property here. You have to mention the name of your property. In this case, it is age. So we have name, and now we have to also specify value. So to specify the name and the value. If your property is a primitive value or primitive type, you can assign value. But what if your property is of type reference? That we'll see later, but time being, let's only focus on value. I want to assign the value as 10. By default, the age should be 10. That's what we want here. But will this work? Let's try. Go back to app, and you can see I have not assigned the value for age anywhere else apart from that your XML file. Let's run this code, and you can see we got 10. So what happens here? The moment you run this application, on this line you will get that particular container in your JVM. In that container, it will check, hey, we have a Spring XML file where you have mentioned about alien object. So it is my job to create that alien object. The moment you create the object, it will also call the setAge method. You know why? Because we are saying property. Since you are specifying property, it will call setAge. Oh, okay. I know you don't trust me here. Let's go back to alien, and we don't have a constructor as well. We have a constructor here. So let me just put this constructor on top so that it will be visible, right? I also want to go to setAge, and by saying here age assign, that's it, just to see if that set method is getting called. Let's go back to app, and now let's relaunch the application, and you can see it says alien object created. That's step 1. Second step is age assigned. So first it will create the object. Second, it will set the age because we are saying property, right? Just to prove my point once more, what I will do is I will go back here, and let me just change the method name from setAge to setAge1. Now what will happen is, if I do that, if I go back to app and let's relaunch the application, you can see we got an error. It's compulsory to have your method name suitable for your variable. So if your variable name is age, it should be age, right? It should not be 1. That's what it's saying here. You can see it says error creating Bean with name alien, because if you go there, it says invalid property age because we don't have it there. The property we are using here is setAge1, right? Make sure that it is setAge. Yeah, if you want to keep it setAge1, in XML as well, you have to say age1. Then it will work, right? Okay, so let's go back, and you can see if I say age, it is giving me error. So let's go back to our code, and it's setAge. So that's why it is set methods and get methods are so important in Spring. So that's about your how do you assign a default value. But what if you have a reference type? Now when you say age, it's a primitive, right? Say int. But what if an alien needs a laptop? Now of course laptop will be a class, then the laptop will have certain methods, and then we have to create the reference of laptop in this alien. Okay, when you say reference, how will you assign the particular value to it? Because we cannot use value there. That we'll see in the next video. So now it's time to have a reference type here, because what we have done in alien is we have a variable which is of type int. But what if you have a reference type? Because what it will affect is this spring.xml file, because here you can see we have a property which is age, and then we are giving a value with an attribute which is value itself. Now to explain that, what I will do here is I will create a simple class, let's say, because every alien needs a laptop to code, right? So let me create a laptop class here, a very simple class laptop. And in this laptop class, let's say we have a very simple method which is compile. So we got a laptop class, and then the method name is compile here. And then in this compile, you will simply print code compiled. That's it. So we got a compile method, and then we are printing code compiled. And in this alien, of course, if you want to use laptop, you need to do that in alien, right? So from alien, you will say, now alien has a laptop type in it. So we'll say laptop. And then we will need a getter setter for this as well. So let's come back here and say right click, source, generate getters and setters. But this time it will be for laptop because we already have it for age. Right now this thing is very simple, right? We have not done anything fancy, just the normal stuff. And then from the code, you will use a laptop object and you will say compile. Of course, right, when you code something, you have to compile as well. These things are simple. Even if you run this code, let's see what happens. The moment you run this code, you will get an error, and that is null pointer exception. But why we got null pointer exception is quite simple, right? Because we don't have the object of alien anywhere. because we are saying we are using dependency injection where the dependencies will be added by Spring Framework. So of course, if you want to work with a laptop, you need to create a bean for that as well. So that's a golden rule. If you have a class, just create a bean for that. So let's create a simple bean, and this will be for laptop. So I will say ID laptop, and then we have a class. And of course, we know the class name now, it's a laptop, right? And then this laptop don't have any variable, so we don't have to specify any property in this case. But the question is how this alien will use this laptop object or the ID. So of course, in the alien, we have a property which is of type laptop, but what you will give the value there, because if you say value, you have to assign a primitive value or maybe a string type. Now that will work for primitives and string, but if you have a reference object, you can't use a value here, because now you want to inform Spring, hey, this alien object needs a laptop object. In that case, you cannot use a value, you have to use a reference. So you have to say ref and you have to say laptop. So that's how you can refer it, right? So now let's verify if this is working. Let's go back to app. Let's relaunch the application and you can see it is working. So basically, if you want to use a reference type the way we are doing here, in this alien class, we have an object of laptop. If you want to achieve that, you have in your Spring XML file, we have to mention that your property, which is laptop, is referring to the ID, which is laptop here, right? Now you can have multiple dependencies. Maybe if you have your class aliens depend upon some other object, maybe let's say a pen object. So in that case, you have to create a bean for pen as well, provided you have a pen class, right? So that's how you implement this reference stuff in Spring. So till this point, we have seen how can we create a bean and then how can you set the properties. Now when I say property, it is simply a variable which you can access with the help of setters and getters. Now here you can see we have assigned two properties. One is a primitive property and second one is a reference property. Okay, but what if I go back to my alien, one of the way you can assign the value to a particular variable is with the help of constructor. Of course, right, they have two ways you can assign the values, one with the help of setters and second with the help of constructor. So what if I want to assign the value to age, but with the help of constructor? So let me create a constructor here with variable, of course. So here I will simply right click and I will say source, generate a constructor with fields. I only want to assign age at this point. Let me click on generate. Of course, you can also create a constructor which takes laptop, or you can create a constructor which takes both. But as of now, let's stick to one particular constructor. So you can see we got age here. We don't want this super method there just to reduce the number of lines we have in the code. So you can see I'm saying this dot age is equal to age. But how can you pass this value? Because if you're not passing this value, and by running this code, let me just run this code, of course it will take the value from the setter. So in this case, we are passing the value from setter. But what if you don't do this? So let me remove the property. Of course, it will not be calling set age now. Let me restart the application. You can see we got the value of age as 0. Okay, so I want to pass the value. The way you can pass a value here is with the help of tag, which is constructor argument. But then what will happen? So even before doing that, let me just remove this default constructor here. Can you see that we have a default constructor as well? So time being, I will simply comment it. So I will say comment, save, and let me just relaunch the application. Now this time you can see we got an exception. But why? So it says no such method exception. So we are not able to find alien in it. Okay, but why? We are not. Okay, so let's try this. It says no default constructor found. Oh, since we are creating this bean, we are creating the object of alien, and by default it will call the default constructor, right? And as you can see in alien, we don't have a default constructor. The constructor which we have is a parameterized one. So in order to run this code, of course, you need a default constructor here. Otherwise, you can mention here, hey, don't use the default constructor, use the parameterized one. And the way you can pass the value is by saying constructor argument in which you can pass the value. So how do you pass the value? It's very simple actually. You can simply say value equal to, and you can assign any value here. So let me say 12. Of course, you can use setter or you can use constructor. Let me just run this code now. Let me relaunch the application. Can you see that we got 12 now? Now this time we are not calling default constructor, we are calling a parameterized constructor by passing this value. But what if you want to assign for laptop as well? What if you have a constructor which takes laptop? In that case, you can specify one more constructor argument here and that will work. The only consideration is instead of having this value here, we have to use ref. That's how inject the value with the help of constructor. So basically we have two concepts. One is a setter injection and second one is a constructor injection. So setter injection simply means when we use property, this is a setter injection. And when you say constructor, that is a constructor injection. Now which one you should be using? Now whenever you have a variable, example, when you go back to this alien, whenever you have these properties, whichever property is compulsory to be assigned or which is required, you can go for constructor. But if you think you have a property which is optional, you don't want to assign the values to it, if you want to keep it optional, you can go for setter. Don't use constructor when your variable assignment is optional, because constructor will give you error. In this case, if you don't assign the value for the age, if you don't pass this constructor age, it will give you error, right? So that's how it works. That's how we work with constructor and setter injection. So before continuing, let me just do some changes here. Example, I don't want to use constructor injection anymore. Let me go back to my property. And for that, we also need a constructor here. And then in the Spring XML file, of course, I want to go back to the properties. I will say undo, 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 and we got it. Okay, now what are things we need? Example, let's say if I go back to alien, every alien needs a laptop. So let's say if you're a programmer and if you want to write a code, you need a machine where you can write your code and you should be able to compile it. Now, don't you think to write a code, you don't need a laptop? It can be desktop as well. It can be tablet as well. So why you're saying an alien needs a laptop? It can be a computer. Example, let's create an interface here and we'll say interface. So we have a very simple interface, which is computer here. And in this computer interface, I want to declare only one method. So which method I'm talking about? I'm talking about method which is compile. So I will say void compile. Now, since we are only declaring it, so nothing specific, let's declare it here. And laptop will be implementing. Of course, you can also go for a class here, which computer class and laptop implements. Laptop extends a computer class, but let's go with interface in this example. So you can see we have a laptop class which implements computer. Now, of course, we can have one more class which is desktop, right? So I will go back here and I will say, maybe I will just copy the laptop class and I'll paste it here. And this will be computer. Oh, we already have computer. This will be desktop. So you can see we have a desktop here. If I open desktop, we already have a code which is compiled, and desktop also implements computer. So we have two classes, laptop and desktop, both are implementing computer. That's great. Let's go back to alien. And now I'm saying, hey, I don't specifically need a laptop. It can be any computer. It can be desktop. It can be laptop. So I will say computer here. And then here I will say com. Okay, of course, for those changes, we have to change something here as well. So I will say right click, source, generate getters and setters for this particular variable com. Done. Okay, and one more change. Instead of having laptop here, we have to say com. That's it. Nothing much. Is all about computer now. So if I go back to spring.xml, what do you think? Will it work? Of course not, right? Here we have to mention the property name as com. So I will say com now. Okay, now will this work? Let's go back to our application and let's relaunch it. So the moment you relaunch it, you can see it is working. And okay, just want to do one more change. It says code compiled in a laptop. And in desktop, I will say code compiled in desktop. Okay, so you can see we have one computer interface and two classes. Let's go back here and let's relaunch it. And you can see it says code compiled in a laptop. That's great. So how it is connecting? So it is connecting based on the property. The property is comp and the reference is laptop, and we got it. Now, what do you think about desktops? Of course, I will talk about desktop in some time, but as of now, it is working because in the bean tag, we have specified laptop. Since we have laptop here, it will work with laptop. If you want to use desktop, of course, you can create a bean for desktop and mention desktop here. So I will copy this, and this will be desktop, and here as well, the class would be desktop. Whatever you mention here in the reference, if you just laptop, it will create object of laptop. You can see that it's working for laptop. And the moment you say desktop here, now it will work for desktop. And you can see we got desktop. So code compiled in a desktop. Okay, so I want to show you a magic here. The magic is, what if the ID which we are using here for laptop is also com? So let's say I'm not specifying it as a laptop, I'm saying it's a com. And here as well, I want to use laptop. So I will say com. Can we have same name? Of course we can have, right? We have seen that before. So you can see we have com here and we have com here. Let's ignore desktop as for time being. Imagine we don't have any desktop stuff. We have a laptop here whose ID is com, and we have com here. The moment you run this code, you can see it is still working because of course you can have a same name. But don't you think when your name and your reference is of same name, why to mention that? The amazing thing is you can skip it. You can just remove this part and you can say, hey, Doesn't matter what the name is, I still want to get it connected. But how? So I want to inform Spring, hey Spring, when you create object of alien, search for the laptop object or search for the computer object, you will find it. But how? So what you will do is in the Bean property, you can mention one important aspect, which is, so let's go back here and say Autowire. So can you see that we have a concept of Autowire? And what is Autowire now? Autowire simply means you are informing Spring Framework, hey Spring, if you want to set some property, if you're looking for some property, if the bean is available, connect automatically. Only when, okay, only when the bean is available, then only connect. So you can see it says Autowire, it is searching for the object now. So here I will say, in fact, we have choice when you say this. So if I say control space, you can see we have by name or by type. So we have two choice. So it will try to search a particular element based on the name. Example, here you can see the property name is comp. So the property name is comp and the bean name is also comp. So it will directly connect it with the help of Autowire by name. Let me just relaunch it and you can see it is still working. So I have not specified any property here, but still it is working. And that's the beauty of Autowire. Trust me, Autowire is amazing. The moment we start working on Spring Boot, when we start working on JP and other stuff, you will love Autowire. Okay, that works. So let me show you one more now. Let's say I don't have this particular bean here. So I will just comment it, right? So it is commented now. And now you can see we have desktop here. So as an alien, you need a computer. And yes, we do have a desktop here. So let me just relaunch the application and we got an error. The error is because we have not specified the property, but you will say, hey, we have specified Autowire, right? In case of Autowire, you don't have to mention the property. It will search for a particular bean automatically. But unfortunately, it was by name. By name simply means it will search by name. Oh, how do we solve it now? So what we will do is, instead of going for by name, we have another way of achieving this concept. Now think about this. When you say you want the object of alien, and alien is dependent on what? So let's go back to alien, and here you can see alien is actually dependent on the computer type. So we are not dependent on the name actually, we are dependent on the type as well. So what if you can go back to Spring XML and you can say, hey, when you say I want to get object of alien, alien is dependent on the object of computer. So what if you can just don't search by name, search by type. So we can do that as well. So here we can say, hey, search by type. Now here it will not look for the name. Example, if you go back to alien, it will not look for com, it will look for the object of computer. And in this case, you can see we have it here. So we have the object of desktop with the name desk. Of course, this desktop name is not important. What is important is this desktop class implements computer. That will be done. Let's try this. So let me just save this code and let's relaunch the application. Can you see that we got the output? And the output says code compiled in a desktop. That's what we want, right? We wanted it to work. And this time I don't want it to search by name. I want it to search by type. So let me repeat. We have two options here. Autowire can go by name or by type. So when you say by name, it will try to match the name of the ID or name of the bean. When you say by type, it will try to find the type of the bean. That works. But then what if you have this object as well? So let's imagine we got two objects. One is laptop and one is desktop. And when you say by type, see, of course, when you say by name, the problem is solved, right? Of course, it will search by name. But when you say by type, don't you think it will get confused now? We have laptop and desktop both. So what do you think? Which one will get preference? Of course, this should get first preference, right? Because that's a sequence. This is the first one, the second one. But then in terms of Spring, everything is object, right? So when you say everything is object, of course, it should be independent of the sequence. And that's where it will get confused. The moment you run this code, you can see it is giving you error. It says no qualifying bean of type blah, blah, blah. It says I was expecting 1, but then we found 2. So your Spring framework is getting confused. Which one to assign? Is it laptop or desktop? How do you solve this? That we'll see in the next video. How do we solve this error? Now you can see we have two candidates here. We got laptop object, we got desktop object, and both are computers. And then we are saying, hey, go by type. So that's where your Spring is getting confused. Hey, should I go for laptop or desktop? Now sequence will not be considered. Now one way to solve this is by going here and going back to the property. The moment you have a property here, the way we did it before, so if you say reference to desktop, now this will solve your issue. If you want to go with desktop, you can see the moment you mention, it will not consider by type or by name, it will simply go with the property. In fact, it will avoid Autowire. So if you run this code, you can see problem solved. We got desktop. And then if you say comp, now this will be giving preference to comp, right? So problem will be solved. So when I say comp, it will give preference to laptop. So this is one way. But what if you don't want to mention this and still you want to go for Autowire by type? Yes, so we have by name, we can go with that, or we can mention the property. Otherwise, by type, if you want to solve this, see, even if you have both these objects, you have to give preference to at least one. And the way you can do that is by using a primary attribute. So you can say primary equal to true. The moment you do that, this particular bean becomes a primary bean. So in case of confusion, it will give preference to this one. So example, if I run this code now, you can see it is giving preference to a laptop. So even if you don't have anything assigned here, even if you don't have by name, it will go for by type and it will prefer this particular bean. You can see we got laptop. Now if you write primary equal to true in desktop, it will be getting the first preference, right? So let's run this code again and you can see we got desktop. So that's how you can solve this particular confusion. So this is where you can use this primary. In fact, the moment you start using annotations, so we also have a concept there, again we'll use annotation there. So that's about this code. We have solved the issue here.